All right, thanks for joining us today for IBTTA's Emerging Technology Committee online series. Today's session is hosted by the Blockchain Working Group. I'm Matt Milligan, chair of the working group, and I have with me Randy Cole, who many of you know is a past IBTTA board member. Randy's going to help me moderate today. He brings special insight into this discussion, having led a toll agency and also having done work in the blockchain space and worked with MOBI. Our guest today is MOBI, the Mobility Open Blockchain Initiative. MOBI is a consortium that works to create and promote mobility blockchain adoption. Its members range from automakers and technology companies to universities and research groups. And we have Chris Ballinger, the CEO of MOBI. We have Alan Gordon, who's with Ford Motor Company. We have Robin Pilling, who is with Distribute and also Daimler. And we have Tram Vo, who's with MOBI and CEO of Zootopia. So thank you, everyone. And we'll start with the introductions. Chris, I think you're going to kick it off, and we'll go from there, and everybody can work through their presentations.
Great, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity. This is Chris Ballinger. I'm one of the co-founders of MOBI. A long time ago, I was a monetary economist. After that, I worked 20 years or so in fintech and quantitative finance. Eventually, I was the CFO of Toyota's financial service arm and ran the innovation group at Toyota. I also worked at Toyota Research Institute in Palo Alto, which is where they're developing autonomous cars and robotics and AI and lots of cool technologies for mobility. About 5 years ago, I got interested in blockchain applications, particularly blockchain applications to the IoT mobility, things moving around, communicating, coordinating, paying for things like infrastructure. So we launched MOBI about 2.5 years ago.
I'm Tram, and I'm also one of the co-founder and CEO for MOBI. And now we just launched Zootopia also, which we'll talk about today. My background is entirely academic and nonprofit. I started out in chemistry, biochemistry, and then went on to art preservation and cultural heritage. Worked for UNESCO and the Getty, based in Los Angeles, for about 2 decades, doing projects around the world, like the Middle East, Eastern Europe, China, South America. For a while, their friends would joke around and say that I must work for the CIA instead of cultural heritage due to my travels. And about 3 years ago, left that and started a couple of things, and MOBI is one of them.
Thank you. Alan?
Yeah, my name is Alan Gordon, and I actually lead a research team that works out of Ford's research facility in Palo Alto, which is called Greenfield Labs. There's about 200 people there total at Greenfield Labs that do work on everything from autonomous vehicles to machine learning to blockchain, right, to a lot of other topics. I lead a team of about 20 people there. And I've done some blockchain projects, and also I'm one of the person who led Ford's efforts with MOBI, but now I'm part of a larger team of about 4 people from Ford who lead Ford's work with MOBI.
Great, thank you. And Robin?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me today. I'm Robin Pilling. I'm currently still working at Daimler Mobility, where I'm responsible for the development of what is so-called the Mobility Blockchain Platform. The Mobility Blockchain Platform is a decentralized B2B service network for future mobility services and logistics. Yeah, I'm glad to help you answering your questions and share my knowledge to also support the whole applications in the world of tolling, and I'm excited to learn from you also how we can come up with more practical applications over there.
Great, thank you. And Randy, I'll give you a second to introduce yourself since you didn't get a chance to speak in the beginning.
Oh no, it's fine, Matt. I think you did a great job. You know, I'm a old Turnpike director and now president of Whiteboard Strategies, helping people use advanced transportation systems and technology and blockchain into their operations, most specifically government and business working together. So thanks for the opportunity, Matt, and IBTTA. I'm excited about the discussion.
Great, thanks, Randy. And a little bit of housekeeping for everyone that's watching. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat box. And if you would, please send it to all the participants so that everyone can see your question. And we'll get those worked in as we go along. We're going to do a brief presentation from MOBI, and I know Zootopia's got some slides, and also from Robin. And then we'll do Q&A with the panel and get your questions worked in as we work through the rest of the session. So Chris, do you want to start with, there you go.
Great, thank you. So let me start, just go right to the next slide. MOBI is a nonprofit alliance. Many of the world's largest automakers, you'll see a lot of their logos here on the left. This is a partial list of the logos. It really grew out of projects that we did at Toyota to put cars and things on blockchains and try and coordinate mobility, test ride sharing, car sharing. And about the same time, people like Alan at Ford and others were doing the same things. And we all found that it was fairly easy to put a vehicle on a chain. But then we realized that the hard problem really wasn't a technology problem at all. The hard problem was getting to scale. And for that, you needed a community. You needed standard ways of doing things, of identifying cars, people, businesses, to pay for mobility services. And the technology with that could be, we hoped, much more efficient, affordable, greener, safer, and less congested. In addition to a lot of the logos that you'll recognize here, you'll see big global organizations like the World Economic Forum, the People's Republic, Ministry of Transport, big insurance companies like USAA and AOE, a bunch of auto suppliers, the big blockchain protocols like Consensus, Hyperledger, Ripple, R3, and others. So it's a very diverse community. We launched with 35 members. We're now up to almost 150. We're diversified around the world, roughly evenly spread between Europe, Asia, and the Americas, and pretty well spread between nonprofits, for-profits as well. So quickly, why blockchain? Just as a little bit of a base, blockchain we think brings 5 really unique capabilities to new mobility. Digital twins, the ability to assign secure identities to physical things and bring digital economics to the physical world. Micropayments, the ability to, through smart contracts and tokens, to make very, very small payments efficient, things that you just can't do through the banking system in a way that scales. Trusted shared data, the ability to, through smart contracts and identities, to, again, scale trust. Data privacy and protection, the ability to have, for example, multimodal transit, where some big technology company doesn't have the ability to scrape the private data of users or third parties who might be on their platform and create a data monopoly. And that's very important when you're talking about multimodal trips. And finally, incentives, the ability through those micropayments to create incentives to change behavior in ways that can make it greener, safer, more affordable, less carbon perhaps. So solving a lot of the problems that cities have struggled with. Quickly, when MOBI was founded, we had a number of use cases that are listed here. These really haven't changed much. We address these use cases through our working groups. We have 6 working groups now, including one that we're going to talk about today, Vehicle Identity and History, which Alan co-chairs, and which created a digital vehicle identity about a year ago that we published for the community. And that has the really important ability to combine a trusted identity of a vehicle with GPS location to create a trusted trip. So for the first time, you can think about using this combination of identity and location to assign marginal cost for road usage, whether it's tolling, micro-tolling, bridges, parking, curbs, congestion pricing, and 100 other applications in monetizing infrastructure. The one that we're going to focus on today, since it's this group, is the public good problem, the problem of not being able to charge for most of the world's road infrastructure. So the total transport infrastructure in the world is about 26 trillion, at least by some estimates. A relatively small fraction of that is tollable, chargeable. It's essentially the fast track lanes and freeways and toll roads in Europe and other places. But the majority of it is in places, cities, urban areas where tolling just doesn't work. Either the traffic patterns are too complex, or you might want to charge for pollution or congestion or other things. And so lots of cities are getting interested in this and thinking about how do we apply tolling technology in urban areas. And it's a real struggle. I'm sure that one thing you find is that when you, even in the best of circumstances, when you have tolling technology, it tends to eat up a lot of the revenue, just running things through the banking system, putting up the infrastructure. The cameras, the gantries probably take a quarter of the revenues or something out off the top. And we think this is a technology, this linking of identity to location to make it much more efficient and perhaps get that down by an order of magnitude or even two. And one of the places where we think it really works well is as these city congestion pricing, pollution pricing, road usage charging systems get more complex, right? More tiers, for example. New York and San Francisco in their proposals had in upwards of 10 tiers of tariffs for different categories of users. Cabs versus Uber versus the private vehicles versus carpooling versus delivery and so on. And it just gets so complex that it begins to overwhelm the cost of managing that complexity. And the trust just overwhelms the revenues and makes it impossible to implement. And so we think that this technology solves three huge problems. One is the problem of stranded capital in public infrastructure. It allows, because you can marginal cost price, then you can potentially securitize and add a new source of public sector finance. You can solve issues of congestion, tragedy of the commons, overuse, and resource misallocation, which is the fact that for much of the existing finance of infrastructure, the wrong people pay. So that's it for my presentation. I thought maybe we could have Alan go next and talk a little bit about the vehicle ID and being done at Ford.
Yeah, and can you guys hear me? Yep, okay. All right, so I actually started at Ford in 2017, and when I started there, I did in early 2018, I did a project with a subcontractor, a blockchain consulting company called Open Innovations. They were the ones who actually introduced me to Chris, right? But that was sort of my first introduction, not only just to blockchain in the context of mobility, right? In the context of the automotive industry, but also trying to sell the technology within an automotive company, right? The reality is automotive companies are conservative by nature. They're very large companies, right? They're companies that build a product that can kill people, right? If they're not designed properly and not operated properly. So there are very good reasons why they're very conservative companies and, you know, somewhat suspicious of new technology. But our role in Palo Alto is to sort of push the envelope, right? We're sort of in the center of the hub of innovation of the nation. And our sort of mission is to bring sort of the best of the valley and try to bring it into Ford. So it was in that spirit that I not only, you know, did one of the first blockchain projects at Ford, but also after meeting Chris, right, and hearing some of the vision that he just talked about, realized this is where we needed to be, right? That ultimately blockchain is a team sport, right? Was a good way that I heard someone describe it. And that is, it's a technology that really shines when you have groups of people who don't necessarily trust each other, maybe don't have a long-standing business relationship with each other, but still want to be able to either share information or transact. So it's natural then, given that that's the strength of the technology, that we wanted to join up with other OEMs who are looking at it the same way, right? And maybe create some shared networks amongst us where it made sense for us to share information or transact in that way. And so that was the impetus for getting involved initially. And I can tell you, it wasn't easy, right? Initially, it wasn't easy. Maybe the first couple of years, it wasn't easy. This year was the first year where when the bill came up to pay our MOBI dues, that actually it was easy. In fact, somebody actually raised their hand, our CTO, and said, you know what, this is strategic. I'll pay for it, right? And even I was surprised by that, right? So that's a good thing, right? And so in terms of the VID group, to me, it was very obvious from the very beginning that the first thing you need in order to make all of these use cases, right, that Chris has talked about work, is to be able to identify a vehicle sort of securely and in a way that can't be tampered with or repudiated on a blockchain. And it might sound easy, like we just have VINs, right? Cars already have unique identifiers, right? So a VIN is a perfectly good identifier for a lot of the use cases that we actually have in the automotive industry. It's not a good identifier for use on a blockchain, right? I'm sorry, that's my dog. So that was one of the first things, I realized that was one of the first things that we wanted to do. And the other thing was my interest was in vehicle history also, right? In other words, the whole idea of, you guys are probably all familiar with Carfax, right? So the whole idea of that sort of information being on a blockchain was compelling to me. That was actually the first project that so the natural sort of synergy between vehicle history and vehicle identification was sort of obvious to me, right? So that's why I wanted to be involved with that. And it has gone well. I mean, it's gone well, but you know how it is. You get groups of people together with different visions, different ideas, or what have you. And you got the inevitable sort of issues that come up. But we did put out a standard, right? So we published a standard last year. And then this year, what we've been focused on is coming up with a proof of concept, right, for that standard, right, with several of the automakers all cooperating with that, along with MOBI, along with some of the other technology companies that are part of the organization. So it's been exciting work, right? For me, it's great to see how far things have come, because originally I was part of some of the first meetings that Chris had over at Toyota before MOBI even existed, right? Just gathering together people representing the different OEMs, right? Who pretty much all have labs in the Valley, right? So just gathering those people together to talk, and that's what MOBI eventually grew out of, right? And it was just me at Ford, right? To where now there's 4 people now, you know, representing Ford at MOBI. And also, like I said, for the first time, we've got people within the company starting to look at this as something strategic. So it's great to be there from the beginning, right? And to see where things have come. And it's nice to sort of get over some of those initial hurdles with getting people just to see the value of the technology. All right, I've probably rambled on long enough. So I think that's long enough for me.
Thank you. Robin, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks first to you, Chris, and also you, Alan. And I definitely agree on what you've said. It's needed, and I think, and even more needed, because now it's really the time to do so. I think, Alan, maybe it was me when I was in Moco LA saying this team sport thing, because it's really about what it is. It's not that easy to say, okay, like Elon Musk, I will develop the battery standard. And whoever wants to follow, please follow me. But who doesn't follow, I don't care. We have way more difficulties here to really work together. The complexities are way higher to enable vehicle to be addressed, identified, and transact with its outer environment. So, and this is a little bit what I want to share today with you and with the community here, to say why vehicle and identities are so important, and how they can enable us to become closer to what I so-called an autonomous mobility future, which everybody talks about. Basically, why are we even talking about that? And why do mobility networks as we see them today doesn't work? It's mostly this whole topic what everybody in this group hears day in and day out, is that centralized systems don't work for complex integrated networks, and the same goes with mobility. So think about it a little bit more practical. If you are an Uber, and if you think Uber, yeah, a very dominant player, but even an Uber has difficulties to integrate new mobility service offerings. Where does this come from? Uber has to basically approach each and every mobility provider that is out there, convince them as an Uber to join their strategic roadmap. And then after this is done, they have found a joint value proposition to say, okay, we want to work together. You can have the lawyers looking after this, the contracts, and then you have the whole tech teams coming, and then they in the end may tell you, oh my goodness, the systems, they look awful, and it's very difficult to integrate them to become a mobility network. So there are mainly three reasons why it's like this. So the first one is what I've just talked about, technical integration and lack of standardization. The second one is, and this is what people often oversee, is that business models are often unclear and immature. So if a Ford, BMW, and Daimler come together and they say, okay, we want to build an open mobility network, we are talking really not apples and apples, but more apples and oranges, because in those companies, everybody speaks different languages, and this is also reflected then by discussions that we see in business models. And once we have solved this, say, okay, we know what we want to do, and we know how we want to technically solve it, it's about, yeah, there are some tendencies within these companies, and it's all going back to the point of governance. So what is needed is basically what MOBI did. MOBI said, okay, we are not following this whole blockchain hype. We really built something that is needed to integrate mobility offerings, and it all comes back to standards for those decentralized mobility networks. And if we have a look at those standards, that's my view on things, is when you build a more open mobility network, basically there are three critical components needed, or critical standards. The first one, and this is what we address today and talk about in the Q&A also, as digital identities. And digital identities, we need them for companies. Let's say you really want to know who this car belongs to. That may be a fleet operator or a mobility service provider. Take the Uber case. But you also want to know who's the users, right? So basically, in the future, I as Robin want to rent out my private car to Alan, but I don't know Alan, but I want to make sure that he has a driving license in the state of California and so on, that he is allowed to take my car from the car park, right? That this is working. Also the vehicles, and this is what we're talking about, and mainly the vehicles need to be addressed, identified, secure, so that everybody knows, okay, this is a vehicle that comes from Robin, that is secure, has a checkbook or car pass, that when Alan drives it from A to B, he will get there safe, and we know more about the congestion and all this stuff. So this is the base. Once you have this and you want to continue solving the problem that are connected to the Uber case that I mentioned, you want to have those offering and contracts way more integrated, digital, so that you don't need to send a contract from party A to party B to party C. It has a lot of subcontractors involved. And think about if you scale this across multiple applications, such that EV charging, users-based insurance, tolling, and so on, it gets really awful. And then let's say now we are having this identity problem solved, we can do digital contracts. What becomes really interesting, especially for transportation consortia or providers, is to say, okay, now before it was maybe Apple Pay and Google Pay that were responsible for financial transaction networks. You help us to get part of this, so how can we make this a joint transaction network that belongs to everybody? So this is distributing financial transactions over networks which are covered by the Financial Securitization and Smart Contract Working Group of MOBI. So once you have that, then you still basically you start to understand why the vehicle, wallet, and identity is the critical missing piece to it. So what is the wallet and how it works? I don't want to technically jump into. There are different ways to do it. But what it is in the end, it's a thing about like your purse, like your normal wallet that has everything in there that you need to identify yourself with. So the basically identifies the vehicle and provides it with legal capacities. So from the day it has this identity, it now can get involved in vehicle-centric contractual agreements and transactions that then lead us what we all want to talk about: charging, parking, tolling, insurance services, and autonomous payments. So what is the answer to all of that? The answer is, and this is what we should do together, and don't basically leave to those big dominant players that will face limitations in the future, is building a more transparent and integrated open mobility ecosystem with all the parties needed, coming from mobility service providers, involving public authorities, and also infrastructure service providers in order to make this all happen. And this is precisely the ambition of MOBI as a next step. They just released the Open Mobility Network, and I'm really interested to see how the Open Mobility Working Group will be set up. And I will follow. I suggest you to follow all the work that is done within this working group, and that's about it. I'm looking forward to the Q&A with you guys, and if you have some question to me, here's my email address, but also feel free to reach out to Chris and Alan from Ford. They are also good sparring partners with regards to all this. All right.
Thank you very much. And I think next we have Tram with Zootopia.
Yes, so Zootopia, what we coined the term the new economy of movement, essentially is a mobility coordination and payment platform that is built on blockchain to enable decentralized mobility applications, data privacy, and allow for services visibility. Think of it as a platform marketplace. It has a tokenized ecosystem where mobility asset owners can charge, manage and charge for use of things like curb space, road, electric vehicle grid charging, and green zone, congestion, carbon pollution, etc., etc. It has 3 main components, and I'll go into details, but at a high level, it has the marketplace. Think of Amazon and eBay, for example. However, it's built on blockchain. Amazon and eBay are built on current technology. So when you build it on blockchain, it allows for trust, and therefore multi-party transactions can happen with trust, and there's no one party can have privilege, access, or control to it. It has a utility token to facilitate transaction with low friction, especially when bank and fiat is impractical. It has an ecosystem, which is MOBI community, and Chris talked extensively about that. The community comes together to create standards and bring diverse competitors together. Right now we have a beta version of it in ISO and Android. It is a platform built on blockchain, as I mentioned, and it enables trust and data privacy. These 2 things give exponential economic gains by cutting operational, accounting, reconciliation, and maintenance costs for all the ecosystem stakeholders. And it's truly a marketplace for all the members and anybody who wants to come and do business in it. When you look at it, it looks like an Uber or a Waze or a Lyft application. However, those applications are meant to scrape and monetize data from their user. This platform is not allowing that. It's meant for bringing the ecosystem to the user. And right now we have over 100 members within MOBI. And we want the user to be able to access services from all of the ecosystem. And we don't want the user to have to download 100 apps on their cell phone to be able to do that. On the left side of the screen here, you can see that all the insurance companies in our ecosystem can offer insurance directly to the drivers of Uber or Lyft, for example. It has mobility services that the city or the toll road provider can connect to your vehicle and the vehicle ID so that it's validated. If it's an electric car, a gas car, or a diesel car, how much does it weigh? And then what time of day it is. The city and the road can be charged for use. And then also you can do incentive. You can incentivize people to walk from their home to the restaurant instead of riding a car to the restaurant. And it has a stable token to facilitate these transactions. Essentially is a stable token backed by infrastructure and mobility usage rights, and is enable efficient monetization of road infrastructure. And why do we think it's good to do this now? And this is the perfect time to do it because the convergence of all these technologies that we know are coming together, and it gives, and it permits anything, a person, a vehicle, or a piece of infrastructure to have a secured identity, be intelligent, and securely transact with each other. We have been working a lot with government. Essentially, none of this will take off if governments don't come along. And to do that, we've been talking extensively, not with just the US government, but the European government too. And this summer, the wonderful thing, we apply for 2 proposals, and we submit 2 proposals for 2 grants that the US have asked for. The first one was specifically blockchain application in road usage charge. And the second one was a complete trip. How do participants in transit and mobility in cities and states can use just one payment form to be able to pay for buses, for metro, for Uber? All that right now is not manageable by the user because I have like 3 different cards in my wallet, a tap card, a metro card, and a token to use the bus. And So those two things alone is really positive that the US government is looking at blockchain and application in transportation. Also, the EU government this summer asked MOBI to give a talk along with Bosch and Consensus on what we think are the immediate use cases for machine-to-machine payment, programmable money as they call it. It was really pleasantly surprising that all three entities were talking about mobility use cases and payment for infrastructure as one of the first things to be using in blockchain technology. And I'll leave you with this quote here from Mark Andreessen. And that's it for me. And I think if you have any questions, let us know.
Thanks, Tram. So I'm going to start with a general question, but it's going to touch on something that each of you have talked about. And we started this discussion with Chris talking about vehicle ID, and that's one of the things that caught our attention was the standard. From an ID perspective, we know that that's a critical piece. But when you started, I want you to talk about when MOBI started, what it looked like then and how things look now when you have other things with digital ID going on like Sovereign and other blockchain platforms. And there's a lot of stuff when it comes to just ID. You started with the vehicle ID, but how do those other things inform what you're doing? And how does your work play into how those other things are going on out there in other parts of the blockchain space? Well, Chris, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thanks. I think one of the sort of eye-opening evolutions in the space in the past couple of years has been maybe the realization that it's not really about the technology. It's not really about, you know, whose TPS is fastest or who is slightly secure or who has a blockchain versus a DAG. What it really is about is agreeing on things that is specific to an ecosystem. What information is important in a business network? And what can you agree on so that everybody can work together? Until you have that, it doesn't matter what the technology is because things still can't talk, right? It's Tower of Babel. Everybody is talking, but nobody is understanding. Things are talking, but they're not understanding each other. You know, roads aren't understanding cars. Different manufacturers have different standards. They can't communicate. Nobody's going to put in the effort to learn 20 different languages that 20 different car wallets have. And so this notion of ID and ID specific to an ecosystem has really taken hold. And so it just turns out to be a lot of work to get the subject matter experts together and figure out what is important to an ID, because an ID is so much more than a VIN or a birth certificate. An ID is everything you need to know, right, to participate in a shared business environment. Or is everything you need to know to determine the value of the vehicle at any point in its life, for example. So just like an ID for a person is so much more than a birth certificate. It's where you went to school, it's what you studied, it's your job experience, it's where you live, maybe who your family is. All of these things are dimensions of your ID. A vehicle's ID or a piece of infrastructure's ID is just as complex and just as important to its use.
How, from the automaker's perspective, and I'm asking this question having had experience with Hyperledger and watching how financial institutions take things that are open source to a certain point and then they break off on their own because they felt like they've accomplished that commonality of whatever it was they were looking for. From the automaker's perspective, do you have that same decision to make when it comes to standardization or working in mobility networks, or is there a push and pull between what you do as a collective group and what your company may want to do on its own?
There certainly is, right? I mean, one of the first directives I got from Ford when I talked about MOBI was kind of like we cooperate when it's with our competitors, when it's to our advantage to do that. And we compete when it's our advantage to do that, right? And I think all of the automakers feel that way, right? Their natural tendency is to compete, right? They're all in the same business. It's a business with low margins, right? So they all compete fiercely, right? But if you look throughout the industry, you'll actually see there are a lot of organizations and various different groups where they cooperate, right? And they cooperate where it's not something that's their core competency, and it's something that they all think they can benefit from. I think this is seen that way, right? In terms of the specific, the automakers really aren't going to build anything. It's not really their nature, right? That's why we sort of have the tech companies and the blockchain experts involved with MOBI, right? To some extent, those guys are going to build it, right? And it might be at our direction, it might be them taking the lead or what have you, but they're going to build it, right? It needs to get to a point where we sort of POC this thing enough and have enough experience with it that consensus starts to emerge. And it might never emerge, right? In other words, it may turn out that 2 or 3 automakers want to go with one technology and 2 or 3 want to go with a different one, right? But the good news there is that there's a lot of interoperability solutions, right, that are developing these days. And in the end, that's what I think you're probably going to wind up seeing, right? Is groups of automakers, one using one technology, groups others using another one, then some sort of interoperability that makes it all play together. And a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of building that is going to be done by the big tech companies, the IBMs, the Accentures of the world, and a lot of the startups. And the automakers will just, to some extent, pick what they like and what they want and go with that.
Hey,
that leads right into a question. Go ahead, Randy.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on something Chris was saying. So the broader concept, and Alan, great to see you, Tram and Chris, but vehicle identity itself and the standard that was published, I most like to refer to as the birth certificate, right? VID1 was the birth certificate. It's replacing the VIN. The work I did with you guys at MOBI was on vehicle identity 2, right? The life of the vehicle. And the reason I bring it up, a real story right here in the heartland, right here in Ohio. A story was published yesterday, a place where my wife and I took our Jeep to get tires replaced. The owner was just arrested because he stole 16 vehicles by erasing the VIN and moving on. And I really think vehicle identity can fix that, right? Committing it to blockchain. But can you just describe the difference between VID1, the birth of the vehicle, and how VID2 works, or how we integrate places like where you take your car to get it fixed, or operating with the toll road, right? Operating with others outside of a system works under the concept of vehicle identity 2.
Did you want me to take that one?
Either.
Well, couple of things to keep in mind, right? Vehicle identity 2 is still in development, right? It's something that we're still working on right now. And there's a little bit of a philosophical thing, right? Which I think, we even see within the group, right? In that I've always thought of myself as a vehicle identity minimalist, right? In other words, I've always looked at it is that the amount of information you need to uniquely just identify a vehicle, I think, is relatively small, right? The history of the vehicle now, that's what's can potentially is larger, right? So to some extent, the way that I see it in my own mind, right, what we're working on now with vehicle identity 2 is we're more looking at bringing in the history, right? And certainly history can affect identity, right? But I actually tend to be of the mindset of keeping those things minimal, right? So the way I look at a lot of the work that's going on right now, I see it as folding in the key portions of the vehicle's history, right, into the sort of vehicle identity, right? But I look at the uniqueness of the vehicle, the unique identifier of the vehicle. I don't see that as changing much from VID1. I will say that that's sort of my perspective on it. I'm not going to pretend that everybody in the group feels the same way.
Chris, do you have other thoughts on that?
No, I think Alan gave a good job. Maybe just real quick, the VID1 was all about what you knew about the vehicle when it left the factory. VID2 is sort of everything that happens in the useful life that might influence the vehicle's value today.
Alan, picking up on one of the things you mentioned before, how do you see some of the pilot projects that are out there fostering what MOBI works to accomplish, which is a cooperation? And from the perspective of adoption, and the audience we have today is toll agencies, and what they see is a road with a bunch of different vehicles on it, so manufacturers shouldn't matter to them. Also, from an app standpoint, you could have an app in the dashboard, you could have an app on a mobile device. How do you see those projects that are out there in the beginning stages today actually working towards something that can be a bit bigger and get past the pilot project stage?
If I'm being honest with you, the question that I get asked more than anything at Ford, especially these days, is how are we going to make money off of this? Right? I mean, and I'm serious. In terms of getting something from being a proof of concept to getting in production, what really needs to happen is somebody needs to be able to build a business case, right? Somebody needs to be able to show how we're all going to make money out of this, right? And I think once you can do that, right, the rest is easy, right? Getting people on board, getting there to be investment in it and so forth, it becomes relatively easy. From the automaker's perspective, right, and us cooperating, right? Because we're still at the stage where most people are still, you know, in their silos, right? Obviously, we're within MOBI, right? We've got a project underway, right? There's nothing actually implemented yet, right? But we're sort of in the nascent stages of building something that sort of goes across the industry. That's where, remember I was saying before, where it's kind of like, hey, we cooperate where it makes sense, we compete where that makes sense, right? So I think the challenge for something like tolling, right, is to create a situation where it's to everybody's advantage to cooperate and work together. And then also to create a situation where people see some money, you know, out of this. And then, you know, getting things to move along become easy.
I'd like to add on a question brought in by Dave Christic, an old friend. He says, what are the communication protocols being used in the MOBI pilots? And I think the bigger issue there within tolling and IBTTA members is there's a lot of talk about 5G, right? And then 5.9 gigahertz and ITS and what's happening there. And the fact that most electronic tolling systems are based on an RFID technology, right? So you've got all these different technologies, different frequencies, systems, infrastructure that needs to be put in place. What approach are you having? Which protocol is most in place, and how you guys communicate through the blockchain pilots you guys have?
I can say that nothing we have done so far, and I don't think you're going to see anything in the near term that's going to require 5G, right? I see 5G as just being something that will make things faster and better, right? Anybody, not just at Ford, but you know, at any of the people I've talked to at MOBI, where it's like, this is going to require 5G, right? In terms of protocols, I think it's better to think in terms of platforms, right, that people are using, right? And then the actual protocols underneath are the protocols supported by those platforms, right? So from that perspective, you know, Hyperledger, right? The various different flavors of Hyperledger are being talked about a lot, but not exclusively, right? I think a lot of the more mature platforms are being discussed, right? And things are so early and things are progressing so quickly that I don't think you're going to see coalescence around those, right? I think that's part of what's going to happen with the POC that we're doing, right? And I fully expect that not everybody is going to agree on what's the best. And that's why interoperability is key, right? And that's something that we've definitely been taking into account.
have a question for
Maybe
Robin.
I can add on that, and then we can go to that question. I think what is very important is that this vehicle identity should be more seen as an infrastructure service. Let's say, okay, you can use this service either with an OEM to say, okay, your OEM Mercedes, you already have a lot of cars in your fleet, and we now want to make them addressable such that, let's say, Ford or BMW or Amazon Web Service or even your organization can access those vehicles and then develop applications on top of that. That could be a tolling. And then it's all about performance issues, right? I can say, okay, I can put a SIM card somewhat in an old vehicle that is out there, as long as I use the MOBI vehicle identity standard to get it addressable. It's then also leads, I think I disconnected somewhat.
We can. I think we can hear you now.
Yeah.
Could you hear me before?
Maybe we lost the tail end of it.
Okay, I say, let's think about the VID1 as the making a vehicle addressable. That's number one. We can all find it. So we all know where those vehicles are right now. And number two is then, okay, once we know where they are and what their address is, how can we get the data or out of it, or anything out of the information out of those vehicles that we need in order to build applications on top of that? And this then can have a different, I would say, this could look differently, and this may also be why the discussion in this group is very active, because there are different technical solutions to do that. Some say, okay, I have the trust at the OEM itself. The OEM already has backend systems that connect to their vehicles. So why don't we have the trust anchor there? Then we don't need to worry about building boxes, hardware wallets into those vehicles, blah, blah, blah. Others say, we are believing in a fully decentralized future where each car should be belonging to the owner itself, where the owner and the car basically do transactions by themselves. And this is the whole, I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, that should be somewhat related to the discussion that you see in VID2.
Yep, I definitely agree.
So whether 4G, 3G, 5G, it's in the end all about the applications we want to build on top of the vehicles.
With that, Robin, can you talk about the wallet in the vehicle, and from a tolling agency's perspective of, I have these customers are going to use apps. Right now there's discussion within IBTTA about a standard for integrating apps into back offices. Is it the same kind of thing on the other side of the app, where there might be a standard integration into a vehicle for a wallet, or how do you see that working out in different scenarios?
So basically, let's start from the source. So the source is the vehicle itself. So the vehicle somewhat needs a connectivity. So if the vehicle does not have a connectivity, then we will not connect it to any network. And then there are different scenarios. Rather, you say, okay, you know, vehicles that have a head unit, or let's call it a device, in there already by after production that connects them to something. Or we have something that we see with fleet operators, or also with mobility operators. They build a telematics box in there that has some connectivity and gets some data from the vehicle bus. So let's say from there we basically have new vehicles, we have old vehicles with some telematic boxes and connectivity. And then this is really crucial to say, at the moment, they're all connected to some systems, right? In Mercedes, they are connected to the Mercedes backend system. Let's take a Sixt or a Hertz or an Alamo, for example. Those telematic boxes, they're somewhat connected to their respective backends. And this is how we see the world somewhat today. So what the blockchain mobility community is now discussing, how much decentralization do we need? So do we need to have decentralization at the vehicle itself? That would mean we just build somewhat everything from scratch and convince the Sixt, the Mercedeses, the BMWs to throw their backend systems overboard? Or in the first step, do we say, hey, we have somewhat a thin protocol that connects to the backends that exists already today, and we help you build a virtual vehicle wallet on a level of the vehicle backend that communicates to the network. What is the difference? The trust somewhat in this scenario is you still need to trust Sixt, that they get the right data out of their vehicles, whereas if you put some box at the source, you get the right data from the source. So in the ultimate scenario, you want to get to the source, but I think to start building something, let's go practical, let's make it easy for companies, and start building, as Alan said, something that we make money out of, and that can immediately generate revenues for those companies. And this is touching existing systems, I would say.
Hey, Matt, I know you're going to have to wrap up soon. I've got a quick question for Tram and Chris. You know, how you've got 8 toll agencies, system integrators, and consulting engineers and platinum sponsors of IBTTA all on the call today. How do they get more involved with MOBI and Zootopia and the projects you're doing? You know, not just maybe a membership, but how do they get involved with what you're doing, find out what you're doing, become a part of this transforming technology?
So if you go to MOBI's website, it talks a lot about auto working groups and what they're doing, what use cases are being discussed in the working group, and what standards are coming out. And then for Zootopia, we are right now would love to do pilots with a tolling organization or multiple on how that would work, just so that to show you the technology works better than the current technology. And from there, we can expand more and more, but the pilot would probably need to happen first.
www.dlt.mobi.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. I know Alan may have to drop off here in just a few seconds, but thank you, everyone. This has been a really good discussion. We could have carried this on for much longer, but we're at our hour mark. And I really appreciate everyone joining us today. And thank you, Randy, for helping moderate the discussion. And if there are any questions from the IBTTA membership that we need to follow up with this group on afterwards, you can send them to us and we'll handle that. So thank you, everyone, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.